and welcome to Magic. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can use server-side validation using Hyperlambda. However, before I'm going to show that, we're going to need a database. I'm just going to create a new database here. I'm going to call it tests, and then I'm going to create one table in the database, and let's create it as customers, and then let's choose customer ID as an auto increment primary key. And then let's create two fields in it by choosing this guy, add field, name, data type text, create, and let's add another field called email, data type text, and create. So we now have a database, and you can start selecting records. Of course, there's no records in the database, and inserting records, etc., etc. However, instead of doing that, I'm going to go to the CRUD generator, and then I'm going to choose my newly created database, and then I'm going to CRUDify all tables. Now, this produces 5 Hyperlambda files for me, which I can find in HyperID. If I expand modules, I expand test, and I can have a look at my Hyperlambda files here. Now, there are 2 endpoints that are related to adding or inserting or modifying data in your database. Now, if I invoke post here, for instance, and I just pass in name, blah, 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 and email 9999, then of course that unfortunately perfectly works, right? So if I now get my items, right, then obviously this is not an email address, right? So that creates a dilemma for me where I need a validation of data before I insert it into my database. Now, of course, I could be using Angular or React or something like that and have client-side validators, but that actually creates another problem for me because, I mean, my validation logic is worth nothing the moment some bugger starts downloading Xcode and creates a Swift front end. So I actually want to do the validation on the server side, right? Because that creates a guarantee for me that it's impossible to actually use my backend without actually providing high quality data. And I mean, obviously, right, as you are returning data such as this being an email address over time, that actually corrupts your database and corrupts your data and results in garbage data, literally, right? So let me just delete this guy first, customer ID 1, invoke it, and now I don't have any more customers in my database. And then let's start adding the validation logic. So I'm going to open up customer.post.hl here, which of course is the post endpoint that is responsible for creating new items and inserting into my customers table. Then I'm going to go just below auth.ticket.verify here, and I'm going to add 2 carriage returns. Then I'm going to type validate, and then function control space on a Mac or control space on Windows. And then I'm going to use the email validator. Just click carriage return. :x: at dot arguments / email, and that's it, right? So if I now hold down Alt and click the S key or Option S on my Mac, and I invoke the endpoint and I try to do the exact same thing once more, right? 90, 90, 90, 90, then ta-da! And of course 999 is not a valid email address, so the backend doesn't accept my data and it inserts nothing into the database, which actually is a good thing. Now I have a backend web API, which actually allows me to give it to my Swift developers without like 200 pages of documentation in order to be able to explain them what type of data this field requires, etc., etc. Then I want to do the same thing. I want to copy this guy. I want to open up my customers.put.hl. 2 carriage return, paste, Alt S or Option S on Mac. And now, if I try to invoke the update email endpoint, at which point I obviously first need something to update, john@doe.com, and of course this is a valid email address, so the endpoint happily swallows my my data. Let me see the ID is being returned here, being 2. If I now use the put, and I invoke that guy, and I pass in customer ID 2, and I pass drop the name, because of course we can do object slicing on Hyperlambda, and I only supply email being invalid, then ta-da, is not a valid email address. If I now type john_doe@hotmail.com and I invoke it, The endpoint happily swallows my data, and I can go back to get, and I can invoke, and as you can see, my email address was perfectly updated here. So these are email validators. Let's look at one other type of validators, because actually Hyperlambda has a lot of validators. You can see all of them if you type validat and you click function control space on a Mac or control space on Windows. You can see date, email, enum, integer, mandatory, reCAPTCHA, regex, string, URL. And in fact, these validators are in their entirety documented at docs.asta.com, documentation magic.lambda.validators. And here you can actually find the documentation for all of these guys if you want to. There's a link in the description of this YouTube video, both to this page and to a page where you can actually register your own Cloudlet and actually try out the stuff I'm doing in this video if you want to. However, what we want to do, we want to now use string validator. :x at dot arguments / name. And why? Because we want to prohibit the user from supplying a name that's shorter than 2 characters, and we want to have a maximum length of our name field of, let's say, I don't know, 20 characters. Now we save this guy, we invoke it, we pass in a name being Q, and an email being foo@bar.com, which is a valid email address for the record, but Q is not a valid name. Then you see here, Q is not a valid string between 20 and 20 in length for a name. And in fact, the backend returns the field name, allowing the front-end technology, regardless of what that is, to actually semantically parse the response and display error messages accordingly, right? If we now add one more character, QQ, then the endpoint perfectly accepts that. Now, whether or not QQ is actually a good name to use or not, that's debatable. However, it doesn't matter. And this allows you to actually validate your data on the server, which of course is crucial in order to ensure you have high quality data in your database. And believe me, over my 25 years as a professional enterprise developer, I've seen thousands of databases where 70% of the data in that database was garbage. Why? Because they relied upon exclusively front-end regex validation logic, resulting in that as they added another front-end to it and or created a bug in their front-end somehow that bypassed the validation logic, etc., etc. The database happily swallows garbage, at which point, of course, over time, it becomes difficult to do business. Why? Because, I mean, if you want to blast an email, a newsletter, and you have 600,000 email addresses and names in your database, and 70% of those are phone numbers, obviously you have a problem. Anyways, that was it for today's video. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. And remember to like and share and whatever with the video. Have a nice day.